All right, I think now's a good time to get started. Welcome everyone to Quinteto Latino's California Adelante, a three-part series where we explore the lives, careers, and music of three California-based composers. Today, we are joined by Chris Pratorius Gómez. Quinteto Latino is an advocacy organization with a professional quintet, wind quintet at its core. We advocate on behalf of Latinos in classical music, building awareness around issues that impact us the most. Adriana will put our social media links in the chat. Please follow us. My name is Chaz Salazar. My pronouns are he, him, and I am coming to you from Phoenix, Arizona on the ancestral lands of the O'odham Jawed, Akimel O'odham, and Hohokam peoples. I am a flutist, teaching artist, and musical activist. And at Quinteto Latino, I am a member of the board of directors. This project today was made possible with support from California Humanities, a nonprofit partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. So like so many Quinteto Latino events, we hope that this can be a conversation between Quinteto Latino, our composers, and our community of participants today. To kick off that conversation, we ask that you share in the chat your name, and by the way, Adriana will put these prompts in the chat so that we can be reminded. So we ask that you include your name, any affiliations or organizations you want to share, your instrument if you are a musician yourself, and something that brought you to this conversation. Thank you everyone just coming in. Thank you for joining us. So again, include in the chat your name, any affiliations, organizations, your instrument if you're a musician, and something that brought you to this conversation. So Chris, thank you so much for being here today with us. It's so great to have you here. Thank you. Could you introduce us introduce yourself to us, let us know your name, your pronouns, where you live, what you do, and how long you've been doing it.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Chris Pratorius Gómez, pronouns he, him. And right now I'm speaking to you from Santa Cruz, California on the Monterey Bay. These are the ancestral lands of Awaswas-speaking tribes. I am a composer and music educator. And so I teach at Cal State Monterey Bay, and I also teach at UC Santa Cruz. I teach piano, theory, musicianship, composition, and sometimes I teach history, although that hasn't happened in a while, but that is something that I can do and that I've done in the past. In terms of composition, I write acoustic music, electronic music, music for large ensembles like orchestras and choirs, smaller groups, chamber music, solo pieces. So lots of vocal music as well.
Yes, and I see everyone introducing themselves in the chat. Please keep that coming. So I wanted to take some time right now. As I mentioned before, Quinteto Latino is an advocacy organization, right? And we advocate on behalf of Latinos in classical music, Latino audiences, Latino musicians, Latino staff, Latino board members, Latino funders, and of course, Latino composers. With this idea of this umbrella term of Latino, Latina, Latinx, Latina, I wanted to ask you, Chris, and I wanted to ask everyone actually here today to include in the chat how you identify, right? If you identify as Latino, Latina, Latinx, or Latina, and then if you identify something else, how do you identify? So Chris, could you share with us how you identify and why?
Sure, yeah. So I at the moment I identify as Latino. I mean, I think a lot of these things are fluid, and I'm kind of okay with that as things change and we progress in our sort of societal understanding and awareness, and history moves forward. I also identify as half Guatemalan. And I've always felt it important to say half Guatemalan, because it's not just genetically that, you know, my mom is Guatemalan and my father was sort of an Anglo US born guy, but also my experience growing up was completely split between living in the US and living in Guatemala. And so it's sort of, that sort of mirrors my actual personal experience. And that's another way I identify as half Guatemalan.
Right, and I'll share that I identify specifically as Chicano. As a Mexican American, I think Chicanos are Mexican Americans, but some Mexican Americans don't always identify as Chicano. But when I say that I'm Chicano, it's clear that I'm about the movement, right? That I'm about advocacy and activism for Chicanos, for people of Mexican descent. And of course, I also identify as Latino and Latinx in the different spaces, and it depends, right? Armando also says, and I identify with the way he describes it. It depends on where power sharing, where it shares the most power, and where that's most beneficial for us. And so I want to hear from you, Chris. Talk to us about your own experience building a career as a classical musician of color. Maybe a bit about your history and your education. And then we'll get into other aspects of your practice later on. But tell us a bit about your history there.
Yeah, sure. So I think, you know, my path to classical music was really sort of circuitous. It was sort of kind of coming to it from the side, and so I want to start by sort of acknowledging my family history. So my mother's grandparents. So my grandmother's parents were both classically trained musicians in Guatemala. Guatemala had a conservatory. He was a tenor and a violinist. My great grandmother, she was a pianist, and they fell in love right before the huge earthquake that happened in Guatemala in 1917 or 1918. I can't remember exactly. And in any case, so there's a story of them, you know, kind of picking up with the whole family and going on a tour of Central America in the late teens, early 20s of the 20th century, performing zarzuelas and little opera scenes and classical pieces and reading poetry, a tour that lasted, I think, like 8 years. So several kids were born in different Central American countries throughout this little tour. So there was always classical music in my life in the background, but it was never something that I participated in. So I never had lessons as a kid. I never had band in school. Like nobody ever said, hey, do you want to join marching band, or do you want to join this? It was sort of like never something that was on my radar. And so I was raised by my mother and my grandmother on my mother's side, my abuelita, Tita, we'd call her, and I without my father, because he was just not available. He was a drug addict, unfortunately. He had addiction problems, and so he was not around. He wasn't available. And you know, when I was 16, I sort of got in touch with anger, and I think a lot of that stemmed from that loss, and just also from the angst of being a teenager. And that anger drew me to hard rock, like Metallica and Guns N' Roses, and just really in your face, angry rock and roll. And that in turn drew me to older rock, Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin, which in a strange way eventually led me back to classical music, because my friends and I started getting into these long, drawn out tracks that you find in some of these classic rock albums, where you have like a 20-minute song sometimes, right? Or an album that sort of progresses through various tracks as one long kind of entity over time. And then, you know, one day we're like, you know what? We've listened to all these Pink Floyd albums and Led Zeppelin albums a million times. Let's listen to Beethoven. So we're hanging out, and I was 16. We started listening to Beethoven, Violin Concerto, the Ninth Symphony. Just that's what we would do, but hang out there may have been some recreational drugs involved. I'm not going to say one way or the other. But anyway, but still my passion was more towards playing guitar and being in a rock band. And I dropped out of high school, didn't really have any plans for college, didn't have any preparation for college. When I came to California, I started going to community college, and I still didn't know what I was going to do. I had no clue about where I was going, and I had no training at this point, formal training at all. I had taught myself guitar. I had taught myself the rudiments of music notation by comparing tablature and the notes on the tablature to the note on the page. That's sort of the way I taught myself. And I got to college and I took a group piano class, and it turned out I was good at it. So I took another one. Then I took a theory class, and it turned out I was good at it. There's something about music theory just made perfect sense to me. So it just progressed that way. And then suddenly I was taking all music classes at Cabrillo, and I was at Cabrillo for 3.5 years. Because remember, like I said, I dropped out of high school. I didn't have any of the preparatory classes. I wasn't on college track. Forget about AP. I never even heard of AP until years later. And lucky for me, my teachers there didn't seem to care about that. Nobody ever asked me what I did in high school. They were just interested in what I was doing now in their class. And I think that's one thing that's great about college. Because I think that's the way most of us are as instructors in a college level environment. We're very interested in what's going on now, and fostering growth, hopefully, right? That's the idea anyways. I mean, I am fostering that growth now, and not so interested in what have you done in the past. I mean, that's like what's going on now in this classroom. Let's do these assignments. Let's see what happens. Let's grow as musicians. And so that's kind of the environment I had in. But interestingly, I was not at that point thinking of myself as a Latino. And my name is Chris Pratorius. The Gómez I add now because I want to acknowledge that part of my family history, because those are the people who raised me, right? The Pratoriuses weren't around very much. My grandparents were much older, and so they passed away when I was like 10. My father has now passed away, and he was not available. And so I was raised by my mom and my grandmother and my Guatemalan uncles and all that family, and half my childhood in Guatemala. So I'm completely bilingual and bicultural. But when I'm here in the States, I could just pass as a white guy. Chris Pratorius, right? And that's the way I was in school most of the time. I didn't really, I did a lot of stuff in Spanish. I set a lot of poetry in Spanish, but it wasn't like I don't know that people ever saw me that way. When I was living in Guatemala, people saw me as a gringo, as a little canche, right? And I was an outsider there much more than I ever was here. So it's interesting having that dichotomy. And I see that's something that my mom's generation shares too, where it's just never quite 100% fitting in anywhere, right? You're sort of like a fish out of water no matter where you go. So it was an interesting family history, but I found it really cool once I became a composer, because all of the family who remembered my great-grandparents as classical musicians, they were all like, we would do concerts in Guatemala, right? And they were all like, you're carrying on your great-grandfather's legacy. This is great. Skipped many generations, but here you are coming back to that classical music tradition in a way. So that was really neat.
Thank you for sharing that, Chris. And I think specifically there's a lot of similarities that I personally have with your story in regards to being right in this place in the U.S. and then also having heritage in another country, right? And for me, it's Mexico. And like you said, over here, right? Well, for me specifically, I'm Mexican over here in the U.S. And then when I go to Mexico, I'm a gringo, right? I don't speak Spanish well enough over there, and to them they see me truly as an American, as a gringo. And living in those both worlds, right? A foot in either one, and I think language really plays a big part too, right? As you said, you're fully bilingual, and even our own names. I had mentioned to you before how names are so important. And we had this conversation about even the pronunciation of our names, right? For the longest time, I personally would say Chaz Salazar because that's what everyone here in the US would say it. But then I realized as I got into college that I was robbing myself of part of my identity. And so I decided, no, we're going to say my name right. And we're going to say say it the way it's supposed to. So I'm Chaz Salazar, right? And I know you had talked to me about Chris Pratorius Gómez, and you like you said, you added Gómez to claim that part of your identity back, but also in Guatemala it's Pratorius, right?
Pratorius, yeah.
And
Chris,
then over here,
yeah.
Pratorius.
And
Um,
Christopher was really hard. Christopher, what people would call me Christopher. My grandmother would call me Christopher, but some people couldn't say Christopher, and they ended up calling me Cristo by accident, which was pretty hilarious because that's Jesus Christ.
right, right.
Yeah, so these name things are complicated. I actually love the idea that the name can be pronounced several ways, and I think this is the fact that we have to have this conversation in a way just points to the sort of lie, this legacy of this lie of monolingualism that we sort of have in this country. I think if you were speaking to somebody in Europe, I mean, they're used to the cities having different names depending on what language you're talking about, and it's not weird, right? I mean, Köln or Cologne, you know, all these different cities have different pronunciations and different names, and I think everybody understands that you're going to say the names in different ways, and it's not weird. But for us, it's just like there's this sort of like, even though no society that I know of is monolingual, there's still this sort of idea that that's like somehow going to be a beneficial thing. And I think I like the idea. We had a conversation with Chaz where, like, I told him, well, you can say Chris Pratorius Gómez or you can say Chris Pratorius Gómez. And that, to me, they both sound right. And that's kind of cool, right? But it's important to be able to do that, right? To be able to say, this is my name and how I want it to be pronounced, right? I think that's important.
Right, exactly. And we're gonna listen to an excerpt in a little bit of your music, but I wanted to first talk about a few of the projects that you did in partnership with Quinteto Latino specifically. I later on in the conversation want to talk about some of your other projects, but first I want to talk about the ones you've partnered with Quinteto Latino specifically.
Sure. So there's been a couple of different avenues, and one of them was in a sort of an educational avenue with kids, and we did a couple of different projects. One in San Rafael with ELM, which is a program outshoot American outshoot of El Sistema, and ELM stands for Enriching Lives Through Music. And then we also did some projects in the East Palo Alto Ravenswood School District. So people think Palo Alto, they often think of tech and really expensive houses. But then there's East Palo Alto, where people who don't have a lot of money live, right? And it's primarily a minority community. And the gentrification and sort of the way that, not gentrification, not what I meant to say, but the way that the different communities are sort of like in these little neighborhoods in California, and the housing costs are making that worse, right? And so East Palo Alto is one of those areas where if you don't know the area very well, you may not even know that community exists, right? And I think that that's actually one of the great things about Quinteto Latino is finding those places. San Rafael too. I mean, Marin County. Oh my God, talk about housing prices. Finding those little communities that need the support that maybe are just overlooked completely because they are existing within these sort of very rich areas, right? And I really love that about working with Quinteto Latino. So what we did is we created music that we could use with the kids, play with the kids, so that the quintet could play with the kids. And in some instances, we would meet with the kids, as something we did in East Palo Alto. Meet with them and be like, what kind of piece do you want? What do you like? What are some of the things that interest you musically? And these are kids who are in band, who maybe haven't been playing that long. Some of them have, some of them hadn't, and I think always the idea that you're part of the creation as a musician, right? And it can be more than just oh, you're bringing the piece to life by playing it. No, you can make some choices, right? And that's one of the things that we did with the kids, and then writing pieces for them, and then having concerts where they would play, and then sometimes play with a quintet. That was really great. And then we also, I was lucky enough to be invited for their Seminario Institute in 2018, and it was their 15th anniversary of the quintet. So I wrote what I called a Cumbia del Quinceañero, which is a cumbia for the birthday, the 15-year-old birthday boy. And it was a 3 quintets at the same time. So it was a 15-tet. And so we had quintet times 3, and everybody was on stage at the same time. I think we ended up with a contrabassoon and 2 bassoons. So that was one, but that was a blast. I mean, that was just so fun to do that. And once again, that interconnectedness of kind of working with people. And I've always tell people that as a composer, the best part is the rehearsal. People think that that oh, the performance must be amazing. The performance goes by in a blink of an eye, and you don't get to talk to the musicians. And then there's the crowds of people, everybody goes home, and then it's over. It's kind of sad, actually. When you're a composer, the performance is kind of it's happy for that bit, but then it's sad. The rehearsal process is invigorating and fun, and it's community, and it's conversation, and it's inspiration. It's everything good about composing for me is in the rehearsal process. And I think that I hope other composers feel that way, and I hope that for performers, you all realize that that's a time to have the conversation. That's a time to be like, look, this is awkward, but hey, I can get a similar effect, and I can do this, and this is way easier, and it's more natural, and let's do that. I had a guitarist that I collaborated with, was like, try this arpeggio pattern, and I'm like, okay, let's use that. And that only happens in rehearsal. And so a lot of what the projects of Quinteto Latino are about, that time together, right? Of course, there's the final thing where you do the concert with the kids, but that time you get together to talk and try things out and really have time as musicians, that's what's really beautiful.
I love that. And I love this idea of community music making, right? Especially with youth, and including their voices in this product, which is this music, right? And that whole process that you're describing, right, with the rehearsal and everything. And I love Quinteto Latino so much because it's they catalyze those kinds of experiences. The organization, we catalyze those experiences. And for me personally, I felt such a sense, number one, of community, but probably even furthermore of belonging here with Quinteto Latino as a board member, as a participant, and as a supporter. I think that this kind of work, right, for our communities is so important, and I love that. You're a part of that, Chris. And so I want to take this moment really quick to mention to the audience again, this is we want to make this event a conversation. So please include your questions throughout the conversation in the chat. We'll have some time at the end to answer these questions specifically. But I also wanted to mention the survey. There's a survey that we have by California Humanities, the funders of this and supporters of this series, this web series of this specific event. Adriana's going to place the information for the survey. It's a short survey, no more than 5 minutes. When you have time, please fill that out. But for now, I want to go on to some of your music, Chris. So could you introduce the excerpt that we're going to play for you here in a couple minutes? Could you tell us about that piece and your process in writing it, and any context you want to provide?
Sure. Yeah. So this is the piece. I've done a lot of vocal music, and I've used a lot of Spanish language poetry. Lots of poems by Pablo Neruda I've set over the years, and this is a set of a poetry by Garcia Lorca, and it's a set that I wrote called Contraponientes. And originally it was written in 2012. It was a commission for a choir, a community choir here ario singers. And I did a new version for 2 soloists. So it's almost like a song cycle for 2 soloists instead of a song cycle for 1 soloist. And in addition to the soprano and the tenor soloist, there's cello, harp, and some percussion. And one lovely detail is that the soprano C.A. Jordan is actually joining us today in our conversation. So you'll be hearing her, and she's here. So thank you, CA, for that. And we did record this at Cal State Monterey Bay, and one of the students did the mixing. So this is mixed by one of the students at Cal State Monterey Bay. It's part of their program. It is a classical piece of music. You may need to turn up your volume a little bit to hear some of the softer sides. So I would encourage you to do that, and we'll turn it up on our end. It's a piece called Balanza. Okay, and this is a sort of, Garcia Lorca talks about the day and the night going back and forth, and sort of some poetic imagery from the two, and the balance that happens as you have day and night going back and forth. And so I try to mirror that in the music. So for those of you who are theory nerds, you know, there's a opening section in C Dorian, which is the sort of nighttime section. And then the daytime comes in as F sharp mixolydian. So you have this sort of back and forth between these 2 opposing keys, which are tritone apart, to kind of as a sort of metaphor for the balance of day and night.
Awesome. All right, Adriana's gonna get that excerpt playing here. That was so beautiful. Such beautiful sounds. Wow. Um, so I wanted to thank you for sharing that, Chris. Thank you for sharing that beautiful music with us. I want to go into more of your process and your practice, right? In your composition practice and just your musical practice and process. And then if you could talk to us a little bit about some of your other projects as well, if you want to share some of that as well. So yeah, please.
Great, thank you, Jess. This sort of thinking about musical process and practice. And when I use the word practice, I'm really thinking a lot about practice, almost like if you have a meditation practice, right?
Right.
Which is like, and it's funny because it almost feels like it's a different word than when we say to practice. Like I got to go practice. In reality, it's not. That's actually the way. That's actually the sort of direction I'm trying to get us to think about it. And I this kind of grew out of my work teaching, because anybody who's been in a music learning environment at the college level knows that it's a ridiculous amount of stress. First of all, there's a ton of different classes. There's lots of different skills. There's no way you're good at all of it, right? Everybody is going to be struggling with different elements. You know, some people are good at theory and have no ear. Some people, you know, have a great ear, but they don't have any theory background. Some people have piano skills, but they can't sing. Some people have great singing skills, but they've never played piano. It always is this mishmash, right? And, you know, I tell students, look, nobody's great at everything. And so in a way, this is just, we know we're going to work to sort of build our skills. And so this is why I focus so much on this, because I feel like we're sort of stuck in this strange position of trying and striving for things, but we shouldn't really be thinking about the goal as we're doing that, in my opinion, right? So let's say you have a goal. I mean, Chaz and I were talking earlier. We're talking about a goal of playing the New York Philharmonic, right?
Right.
But yet the daily practice is going to be whatever the technical issues are that you're dealing with, whatever exercises, whatever pieces and repertoire you're working on, right? And so if you're sitting there, you know, and the whole time you're thinking about this goal is so far away, you're not actually in the moment thinking about what you're supposed to be doing in that moment. Like, how do I use my body? How do I sit? And so what I've noticed for me personally as a composer is that as soon as I started letting go of the end point of the product, because as a composer, it's always like you're putting out this, it's almost like you're a content creator, right? Putting out PDFs and recordings and this and that, and there's performances. And as soon as I stopped worrying about that end point and started focusing more on what are the nuts and bolts of my personal creative process, like how, when I sit down, you know, what are the things that I go through that inspire me, that give me joy, and that make me kind of interested and curious and want to start assembling music, and letting that happen. And then and if I approach that without worrying about where it's going to go, and then first of all, there's more freedom and more playfulness in my session, in my practice session. But then there's also, it's easier to let it go and not use it. So let's say I've been playing around with an idea and it doesn't seem to have a home, or it's not going anywhere. Well, that's okay, right? Because it's not about the end goal. It's about sitting and having that regular practice. And I once sat down and thought about this and realized that my idea of how much music I had to be writing was totally distorted. You know, even if I took this approach of just focusing on the specific nuts and bolts of writing music, as opposed to focusing on how much music I'm putting out into the world, I could still end up with an hour of music a year. So when I'm retiring, I'm going to have like 40 hours of music. Like, who's going to listen to 40 hours of my music? I mean, that's just, it's all so much music already. So I think that we have a little bit of a distorted view about, as composers, about how much we need to work in terms of output. And I just really like to kind of go back to this idea of setting up my life so that it's set up so that I can go and sit down and improvise. If something good comes out of it, I can easily write it down or record it. And if nothing comes out of it, then that's okay. But I sat down and engaged with my personal compositional practice. And once again, that's one thing I talk to students about, because I feel like it de-emphasizing this product or final performance, which inevitably as musicians, we want it to be perfect, right? Mm-hmm. Emphasizing that end point and emphasizing the daily sitting down and engaging in whatever the details are of our musical lives, I think is really healthy. Because then if you've sat down and you've practiced, then you've done your job as a musician, right?
Right. And can you tell us about your other projects and your passion projects, some other projects that you've had in the past, and then maybe some that are possibly coming up?
Yeah, so I think the big thing right now that's on my mind is, of course, the opera that I'm kind of currently trying to find a home for, which is Dreams Americanos. It's an opera that I wrote in collaboration with Alan Olejniczak, who's also here. He's a librettist. Alan Olejniczak and I wrote this libretto based on a Cyrano de Bergerac, which is an old play. But in any case, Dreams Americanos is a bilingual opera. It's sung in English and Spanish, and it's set in a pub here in Santa Cruz. And I love the idea of setting an opera in a pub, a bilingual opera in a pub or a restaurant, because California restaurants, as we know, have this segregation a lot of times, right? Where you have all the brown folks in the back in the kitchen, and you have oftentimes the serving staff, young white women, oftentimes is what it is, It's changing, I think, now. But that was the time. That was the way it was a lot, and that was the way it was when I was working at a pizza place here in Santa Cruz, which was one of the things that inspired me for this opera. I worked at this pizza joint. I was a delivery driver. This was right out of college and during college, and I would kind of talk to the guys in the kitchen in Spanish and listen to whatever top 40 was happening in Mexico, and then I would go and deliver pizza to the delivery drivers who were all white. And and then have that sort of dual life, right, that we often have. So that really interested me, and it wasn't a negative work environment. I don't want to portray it that way. It was just that's just the way it was set up, right? So we had this idea then to set this opera, Dreams Americanos, in this environment, and so it's essentially a love triangle where we have a recent singer-songwriter coming from Guatemala, recent immigrant, Spanish-speaking. Her name's Dani, and she's queer. We have a second-generation Mexican-American barman. When we have Maddie, who's a UCSC student, who's an Anglo student. And both Dani, the singer-songwriter from Guatemala, and Christian, the barman, fall for Maddie. And the way this plays out is that Dani is this incredible singer-songwriter, but she's sort of shy and doesn't go after the woman she wants. Christian expresses interest. Maddie seems interested, and so Dani takes the role of sort of facilitating and helping Christian woo Maddie. And how does she do this? She does this by writing songs. And she'll write songs, because this is a restaurant pub, and so a lot of them are performers. And so Dani writes songs that a Christian then uses in this process. And of course it doesn't work out, all sorts of silly things happen. But I also wanted to use the bilingual nature of it in the scene structure, in the way that the opera operated on stage. And so there's one scene, which is sort of a famous scene from Cyrano de Bergerac called the balcony scene. And in Cyrano de Bergerac, the balcony scene is sort of a mock of Romeo and Juliet balcony scenes. So the way it works in the original Cyrano is that Cyrano is feeding the lines to Christian, because Christian doesn't have the wherewithal to write poetry. And then Christian delivers them to, in this case, the character's name is Roxanne. So in our opera, we had a similar idea, but we had the thought to do it bilingual. So Danny sings the lines in Spanish. Christian then translates them and delivers them in English. And so we have this progression of the poetry being sung in Spanish and English in a way that sort of supports the narrative going forward. So right now we're in that sort of zone of, we have this opera, we busted our butts, it's there, and who wants to do it, we don't know. So we have to find a home for it. And one of the things that we were really passionate about was that there'd be lots of roles for Latinos, right? That was one of the things that we wanted. So we have Dani as a Latino mezzo. We need a Latino mezzo. Christian, we need a Latino tenor, and that is making it harder. Because even for the recordings, we're making some recordings right now to sort of promote the opera. I don't want to record it with, I want to use Latino singers for the recordings. I just feel like it's going to lose a little bit of that authenticness if we're trying to create this opera, and then people look at the credits and it's like Joe Smith sung tenor, and whoever else, Allison Smith sung the mezzo part,
Right.
So so in a way this idea of being inclusive is a challenge, right? And I think this is a challenge that a lot of us who want to create classical music for people of color in a country where people of color don't have the opportunity to develop those skills, and so don't often go into that career, right, is really tough.
Right. And
it's a challenge that we're happy to take on and figure it out and just be patient and find the right people to do it.
Right. And I was going to say, I think the entire concept and idea of the opera, it's exactly what we need, right? I feel it's exactly what we need and probably very much so in the opera space and in the overall classical music space. I think having these roles specifically for people of color, specifically for Latinx peoples and other people of color, and in addition, really highlighting in the concept and in the story itself of the opera, the different intersectionalities that we all have, right? As POC, you said Dani's queer, right? And so I think it really highlights all of these different layers and the different facets of our identities, right, as people of color, while working towards that and advocating and having the activism. So I love that, and I hope that this opera finds a home by next year. And so and this is what I mentioned to you before, Chris, because this is what we need. These are the kinds of projects, these are the kinds of pieces that we need in our classical music space. And so I want to take this time for the audience members, or if there are any questions, and please feel free to ask them. This is the time that we have set aside to answer any of the questions that are there.
So we have a question from Diane.
Diane, do you mind unmuting and asking the question?
Not at all. I wondered whether there are any specific Latino or Latina composers who have influenced you that you enjoyed a lot, and have actually influenced your own compositional style. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's an interesting question, and I think that yes, but maybe not in the manner that people are expecting. For me, the biggest influences from Latin America are actually in popular styles. And so, for example, a huge influence and an influence that comes through in Dreams Americanos in one of the arias is Los Panchos, and the old original Los Panchos, because in Guatemala, we import a lot of culture. It's a small country, right? So it's not like Mexico with their own cinema and huge recording companies and huge recording artists. You know, in Guatemala, we're always importing a lot of culture. My grandmother always listened since she can remember. She was a kid, listened to Los Panchos, which is a Mexican trio. They sing Mexican boleros, romantic pieces, 3-part harmony with, you know, beautiful solo guitar lines. That was a really big influence, actually, in terms of rhythms and style when I was trying to figure out a way to create an authentic sort of love song. So a sort of a format for an authentic love song. And another influence for me has been traditional marimba from Guatemala, which is one of the musical art forms that we do have in Guatemala, which is a real weird amalgam. You know, you listen to marimba from Guatemala and it sounds like foxtrots and waltzes, and it really is. It's this weird thing where you have this instrument, which as far as we know came from Africa, the marimba, tuned in a Western scale, played by primarily indigenous men who learned the music by rote, you know, and it's really an interesting tradition. And I think if anybody wants a project in ethnomusicology, to go into Guatemala and figure out how these people learn and teach music is really interesting, because it's a very unique kind of amalgam. That's a huge influence on me as well. And one thing that's been influential throughout my career is actually Guatemalan weavings. And so I've used the idea of weavings and the patterns that people use in weavings as ways of organizing patterns and repetition in music. And so I'll take like a musical weaving that may have, geez, I have something right here, for example, something like this, which may have different patterns. And I can map out each one of these lines of different colors as different melodies, and then repeat them in ways that mirror the repetition in the weaving. And that's been a big influence on me as well.
That's amazing. We have another question by Andrea Arias. Andrea, do you mind unmuting and asking your question?
Not at all. Hi, I've so been enjoying this conversation. Thank you so much. So my question is, what are you most excited and looking forward to for the new generation of Latinx composers, musicians, and artists? Because, you know, as I'm sure a lot of those students are studying with you at Santa Cruz, Go Slugs. And I'm just excited to see, like, you work so closely with them. I'm sure the future is promising. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, and unfortunately at UCSC, there aren't a lot of Latino students, but I do have a lot at Cal State Monterey Bay, where we have a much more diverse student body in the music department there. And I would say there's two things. One of them is gaining a sense of confidence and belonging in this endeavor. I think that seeing that happen in students, where they start realizing that there's no magic here, right? This is just learning the process of doing it and learning the process that works for you. And then, wow, I can write music and I can create music in different places, and having the confidence to do that and put it out there, I think is really beautiful, because I've seen that. I see how tentative sometimes it is for people, and then having the ability to really start growing is so exciting as a teacher. And, you know, I had one student and she was like, you know, and I'm like, well, what do you want to do? You know, first of all, I told her, you should be a composer. And she's like, who, me? I'm like, yeah, you. Like, all the decisions you make every time we have an assignment are good decisions. Like, you're always making good, in my opinion, good compositional decisions, and there's no reason why you can't compose. Like, there's nothing secret about it, right? And I kind of just let that simmer, and she didn't say anything. And then I had a class with her the following semester, and I said, okay, everybody introduce yourselves, what your goals are. And she said, my goal is to be a composer and go back to Salinas and start an orchestra. And I was like, whoa, that's great. And that's exactly the kind of stuff that I want people to do, to just feel the freedom and power to sort of follow their individual interests and passion. And I think that one of the things that I'm really, really curious about is just what the music's going to sound like, because nobody knows, right? This is the beautiful thing about art. Nobody knows what's going to be coming in the future. And it's always the young people who are going to end up driving the innovation.
Just to add on super quickly, thank you for being that type of professor and teacher who affirmed your student, because as a previous student, like I just graduated last March, so I'm kind of fresh. Thank you. You know, having a professor or a mentor or even a family member or friend who sees something in you and tells you that is kind of like the push that you need to see it in yourself and accept it. Because I feel like deep down we know it, but it's so affirming to hear someone say, I see this in you and you can do it. And just that simple push, like, look, you inspired your student to accept, you know what, I do want to be a composer, and now I want to start an orchestra in my community. Yeah. Like, how beautiful is that? Yeah. So I wanted to thank you for doing that and encourage all of us on the call to affirm each other, so that we can really step into our calling and our gifts.
Because I do notice that difference, because I also teach privately, and you know, I live in Santa Cruz, and so, you know, the kids who take private composition lessons come from very affluent backgrounds, and it's interesting the struggle with composing and creating, and suddenly like having a bunch of ideas and having the ideas run out and then doubting yourself. All of that's the same, but the initial idea that I can compose, these kids had it from the beginning, right? They just, well, sure, why can't I try composition, right? It's just totally natural. Yeah, I can compose. Why not? I can do that, you know. And it's important, I think, for all of us to realize that not everybody has that at home. Maybe it's just not even something that's on the radar for them, or there's not anybody in their lives who told them, look, you could compose if you wanted to, try it out. You know, sometimes something simple like that. And for a lot of students, they're not getting that at home. So they need to find other places. And I think that those of us who, like you're saying, Andrea, those of us who have that ability, we should be supportive of people to try things out. You know, and I think sometimes people think like, oh, I don't want to, you know, it's so hard. I don't want to encourage somebody for a career, and you never know what's going to happen. It's just a matter of trying something new, trying something creative. You know, we're not making promises to anybody. We're just encouraging people to be creative and express themselves.
Yeah, and I want to second that. Thank you, Chris, so much, because I do want to mention also from my own personal experience how important it is to have a professor, specifically a professor, which is someone who is your mentor, a professor who actually believes in you. And that really has a huge impact on students. Because I will say specifically as a Latino student, as a person of color who came from a socioeconomically disadvantaged background, I grew up very poor. It means a lot when you have a teacher that actually believes in you and what you can offer, and that really helps the student bloom and realize their full potential. So thank you. Yes, I second that, and thank you for bringing that up and honoring that, Andrea Arias. I really appreciate both of you. I want to take this time now to express gratitudes. First, I'm thankful that Armando Castellano, founder and French horn player with Quinteto Latino, is is huge about taking time to specifically express gratitude. And so I want to start with expressing gratitude for California Humanities, a nonprofit partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Thank you for your support of making this 3-part web series possible, California Adelante. And also, Quinteto Latino is a nonprofit organization as well. And I wanted to mention that your support of any amount helps Quinteto Latino support Latino musicians and bring culturally competent music programs to Latino youth. Adriana will put in the chat the link for any of you who are willing and able to donate. I want to thank Chris again. Thank you so much for sharing time and space with us here today. We appreciate all of your expertise, all of your words of wisdom, and sharing your experience, right, as a person of color in this classical music space. I also want to express gratitude to the entire Quinteto Latino team. Thank you, Vince Dominguez, Marketing Manager. Thank you, Adriana Ramirez Mirabal, Program Manager. Thank you to all the Quinteto Latino musicians, Diane Grube on flute, Kyle Bruckman on oboe, Leslie Tagorda on clarinet, Sean Jones on bassoon, and of course, Armando Castellano on French horn. Thank you, Andrea Temkin, our general manager. And thank you to all of the other Quinteto Latino board members for your undying support. And lastly, but not least, I want to thank the entire Quinteto Latino community, which are you, all of you who are here today and who make Quinteto Latino what it is. As I mentioned before, I think one thing that Quinteto Latino does so well is build community, and also it's a place where belonging is built as well. I feel a sense of belonging here as part of the Quinteto Latino family. So thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you soon at another Quinteto Latino event.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Chaz.